Okay, hello everybody. My name is Dave Munger and I'm a librarian with Sacramento Public Library. Welcome to this month's genealogy workshop. Court is in session. Find your ancestors in the law library. Okay, now I'm going to repeat a few quick notes before we get started. All microphones have been muted to limit distraction. I'll change the setting to let you unmute yourself after the talk concludes so you can ask questions of our speaker, Pamela Bell Dallas. Today's session will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel indefinitely. I'll put the link to our YouTube channel in the chat. Because we are posting this video, for privacy reasons, we will not enable you to turn on your own video. If you have technical issues during the presentation, please send me a message directly in the chat and I'll do my best to help. I will also note all questions to be asked during the Q&A after the presentation. For questions about future genealogy presentations or to receive a copy of the handout, please email contact@saclibrary.org. I'll also post a copy of the handout to the chat for download. One thing I'd like to ask everyone today, I'm currently in the middle of planning our schedule for 2024. So if you have any suggestions for topics or speakers, please send me an email at contact@saclibrary.org. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Pamela Bell Dallas. Pamela has enjoyed conducting personal and client research for more than 30 years using a wide variety of repositories and record sources. She has presented genealogy lectures at national conferences, regional conferences, and one-day seminars, as well as at local society meetings. Pamela's genealogical focus is Midwest research, methodology, and unique record sources. She is a member of the Placer County Genealogical Society, Roseville Genealogical Society, National Genealogical Society, Genealogical Speakers Guild, and the Association of Professional Genealogists. Her presentation today is Court is in Session, Find Your Ancestors in the Law Library. Pamela, I will pass the virtual mic to you now.
Thank you, David. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for putting on these genealogy sessions. For all of us who are addicted to genealogy, this is just a wonderful resource, and I certainly enjoy the presentations that I watch and listen to. And so thank you very much to you and the library for doing this. It feeds our addiction. So
Thank you very much.
it's a wonderful thing. And certainly libraries and librarians are a genealogist's best friend. Where would we be without our libraries and certainly librarians to help us navigate through? And that's part of what I would like to discuss today, talking about the law libraries and what we can find there. And just a little disclosure, I am not an attorney. I am not a legal expert. I am not an expert in law libraries. But I wanted to share some of the success and some of the fun things that I have found in law libraries. I've mostly visited law libraries here in California, but as I visit relatives and friends in other states, if I can get into a law library, I try to do so. And I just want to start by letting people know that the publications that we're going to discuss, most law libraries have a wide range. They don't just have the published books and materials on their state. So let's get going and find out how to uncover your ancestors who are hiding in the law library. So law libraries are not for genealogists necessarily, surprisingly so. They are really to help attorneys, law students, judges, law clerks, those in the legal field. But again, the law librarians that I have encountered have been incredibly helpful. They don't look askance when I say, I'm a genealogist and I'm just here trying to do some genealogy research, and this is my goal. This is what I'm looking for. I have found that I can browse the shelves, I can ask questions. More and more, they're even letting people use the computers, and we'll get into that a little more as we go through. Law libraries are found all over the place, in law schools, courthouses. There are county law libraries, there are state law libraries. There's a law library, of course, in the Supreme Court building, the Library of Congress. Even the Department of Interior has a law library. So, once this gets on our radar as we're out doing our research, we'll be able to find law libraries all over the place. And I'm going to talk a little more later in the presentation about the Library of Congress, my favorite resource ever in genealogy, my favorite website, my favorite repository. The Library of Congress just has so much for us. And their law library, of course, is incredible. We're fortunate in California that every county has a law library. It might be teeny tiny, it might be huge, but every county in the state has a law library, and they have to make it available to the general public. That doesn't mean it has to be available every day or all day on the days that they're open, but they have to allow the general public in. As with any research, I would visit the website before going in person, and probably even call ahead and let them know what you're looking for. And as always, when we do our research, go prepared. Have your names and dates and what you're looking for. Some volumes are back on the shelves and you need to order them. And of course, everything has changed since COVID, so you want to know what their protocol is currently. So what is the material that we could find in a law library? What are we going to be looking for? Well, there's a wide range, obviously, of materials there, and everything can be of value to us as researchers. Everything they have can be of help to us. They have statutes. It's important for us to know when a certain law changed in the geographic area that we're researching. They have biographies of judges. They have early law books. They have printed court records. They have Senate journals. It just is amazing what you will find once you go inside and start visiting the law libraries and start researching. We're going to talk today about the American Digest, the State and Regional Digest, Federal Digest, the U.S. Supreme Court Digest, and the West American Digest. So this is a multi-volume set that is indexed of all published federal and state appellate court cases. Now, not everything was published, so this is just what was published, and it has to be part of the appellate court. There has to have been an appeal, and it is indexed by topic and case names, so by the legal topic and then who sued who. There are indexes, and then you can go through and actually read the cases. So the American Digest system, what is so exciting about this, and I'll just kind of go off on a tangent a little bit here. I first discovered this, and I'm not the first person to be searching in the law libraries, but for me, I first found this out when we lived in the Bay Area. My husband stopped in at the law library in Oakland. He wanted to look up something quickly, and I tagged along. We were going on to do other things, and while I was waiting, I started browsing up and down the shelves, realized what was there, and right off the bat found something that was important in my own research. Well, as you know, as genealogists, that's all you need. That little nugget of success, and you're hooked forever. So what's exciting is there is the American Digest, the Century Edition. There is a cases going back to 1658. The Wickham Library, downtown Sacramento, has this volume from 1658 to 1896. That's at the top of the screen here. It's available on microfiche, and the actual volume is there. How exciting is that if you have ancestors here that early and they were involved in a court case and you can read about it? It's incredibly exciting. And then there's the 1906 decennial edition, and that has the cases from 1897 to 1906. And from then on, they are decennial. So if you have a time frame and a geographic location you can look and see if your ancestors are in any of these volumes. And you think we're in a litigious society today, you should read some of the things that happened in the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s. People were no less litigious then. Here is the spine of some of the volumes of the American Digest. This is the 1897 to 1906, and certainly if you had family here during that time frame, you're going to want to look through these volumes. This is the title page of that early edition, and the breakdown, and this is by the Who Sued Who, volumes 21 through 25. As you can see, volume 21 is A through B, volume 22 is C through F, and so on. These are available at the California State Law Library, the Whitcomb Library on Capitol Mall, right next to the Capitol. Now, all libraries don't have this early edition, and so you're going to have to find a large, a state law library or a large law library, because typically attorneys are looking for these volumes to cite cases, and as cases change, as time moves on, these earlier editions aren't as important. But to us, they are vital. To us, they are incredibly important. So one of the things to keep in mind is that if a corporation is listed, it's listed from the very first letter. So the example here is A.F. Pike Manufacturing Company versus Cleveland Stove Company. It isn't under Pike as we would think to look it up. It's under A. We would find it indexed under A. So that's one of the little idiosyncrasies of the indexing. The other is that if it's a geographic name, if it's a county, a city, a state, a township, they drop what they consider unnecessary parts of the name. So Adams County versus Smith would just show as Adams versus Smith. Well, that's confusing because there's the name Adams and there are jurisdictions named Adams, Adams Township, Adams County, and so forth. There's also an index that covers 1658 to 1906. So then there's the Federal Digest, and you don't have to worry or even remember the differences in the volumes, just that there are all of these different ones available, and they will have different information, different cases, therefore more options to find your ancestors. So the Federal Digests are by time period, and the spines are different colors. So when you go through, you can easily see, oh, I want the red one. I want the early 1754 to 1939, or I'm looking for something a little bit later. I'm looking in the 1975 to 1992 time frame. That one's burgundy. So they're all a different color. So then we have the reports. So the official record, the law reports of the rulings, the orders, case tables, they list every case decided in alphabetical order by name of the petitioner, and then by the name of the respondent. And you can look up, and we're going to talk a little bit later about where to find some of these online and in the law libraries. And these are the proceedings of the Supreme Court. So then there's the National Reporter System, and we've got the Federal Supplement. We have the Federal Reporter, and then we have the United States Supreme Court Reporter. And this is all in your handout, so you don't have to take a lot of notes. And then there's the Topical Reporter. So if you know that your ancestors were involved in a bankruptcy, something happened when somebody was in the military, you can look for the Federal Topical Reporters, and those will be broken down by the specific type of case. There are state and regional digests, and these somewhat overlap. You might find the same case cited, the same court case with the same information in both a regional digest and a state digest. And these are published by West. West was the first publisher of the digest and the reporters, West Publishing, late 1800s. And the breakdown is the Atlantic region, northeastern, northwestern, Pacific, southeastern, southern, and southwestern. And so you need to look and see where your state falls into this. And some of it doesn't necessarily follow along maybe how the way we learn geography. Kansas is in the Pacific, so we may not necessarily look there. So you want to double check and make sure that the state you're looking for is in the reporter that you are researching. So this is kind of an overview. I know it's a little confusing going through, but this is a little an overview of what we just discussed. So the digest system covers the regional digest and then the state digest, the federal digest, and then those are broken down to the Supreme Court, the bankruptcy, federal, military, veterans appeals, and then there's the subject index. And all of these obviously can be very useful to us. So let's go back and look at the American Digest system. And so we're going to look at the fourth decennial. Let's say we have some individuals that we're looking for, and we're going to look in this 1926 to 1936 decennial volume, which is the fourth decennial volume. And we are going to look in the index and see if we have the surnames of our collateral or our direct ancestors that we want to research. And one of the things to keep in mind is even if the family has left an area, the descendants can still be there or a lawsuit can still take place in that jurisdiction. So here we are, we're looking at the fourth decennial digest. And we are looking at, and it's West Publishers, and we're going to look at the state and federal courts as reported in this volume. And it's a little blurry, but we're looking for the family of STEP, S-T-E-P-P, and you can see circled in green. There's lots of cases for STEP, and certainly when you're there, you want to take a peek at all of them. You don't want to leave any behind. But I sort of narrowed it down. I looked at several, and I narrowed it down to these three. And I had steps in Kentucky and North Carolina. So I decided that the first two were going to be a little more important. But Tennessee is close by, so you never know. You want to check everything. And so for the purposes of the example, I chose the one in Kentucky. And we're just going to look at what we're going to find, how we're going to find the information, and what we can find in the volume. So we're looking for the top one here, step versus step. And so let me go back to this for a moment. We can see that first line, that's what's in the index, and that's what tells us where to go and what to find, or what we're going to hope to find. So step versus step, 216 Kentucky, 243, 287 SW, 707 adverse possession, and so on. So we're not going to be concerned about, I mean, we know what adverse possession is, but we're not going to be concerned about that in finding it. Below is how we're going to find it. So step versus step, that's who sued who. That's what we're looking for. The 216 Kentucky 243, so up to that first comma, that's going to tell us the volume, the name of the reporter, and the starting page. And so since it says Kentucky, we know that's going to be a state reporter. That's cases for Kentucky. The second one after the comma, 287 Southwest 707, it's going to be in the Southwestern Regional Digest, and the page number is going to be, it's going to start on 707. So hopefully that makes sense. We can find this case reported in both of those. Now, maybe the law library that we're in doesn't have the state digest or the state, the printed reporter. because maybe we're in California and it's a smaller law library and they don't have the room for everything, but maybe they have the Southwest. Obviously, if they have both of them, we want to look at both of them. So here's the Southwestern Reporter, volume 287, which is what it said to look for on our index. And this was published in 1927. We're looking at a case that happened between November 24th and December 29th, 1926. We go to the page that it says that our case starts on, which is 707. And there at the top, you can see 707 and lower right, step versus step et al. That's where our case starts. That's where the recap of the case starts. And it goes page after page after page after page. And what are some of the things that we're going to see? I've highlighted some of the areas that I found important for my research, and I'm just going to show some larger areas. So one of the individuals, so there was a suit, and then one of the sides lost, and so, you know, we never want to lose. So what happens if we lose? We go back and say, hey, I want a do-over. I'm not happy I lost. I want to go through this again. So there was an appeal. During the appeal, one of the defendants died. His widow, Amy, who's listed right at the top there, her children and other relatives proceeded with the case. So this was a case of one brother suing another brother over land. Surprise, surprise. So you can see in the lower part where it's highlighted, it tells us how much land. We have a county. We have initials of the brothers. There's WB step. It talks about the title. The individual died. His widow and heirs are continuing. On the left side, where it's highlighted in the left column, the second portion that's highlighted in yet, well, go back up to the first, it gives us the dates. The petition for the land, 21st day of February, 1899. So again, this publication that we're looking at in the law library was published in 1927. But here we have information on our family and land that they have title on going back to 1899. Then the second part of this gives us our metes and bounds legal description of the land. And, you know, metes and bounds is we start at the big oak tree and we follow the creek, and that's exactly what it has here. It begins at a designated tree, a large rock. It follows a little crooked branch. It empties into Wolf Creek, and on and on and on. But look what it tells us. The designated tree, a corner of Gabriel Frederick's line, standing in the center, and then it goes on. So we now know that a neighbor, we can do our collateral research. We now, if we didn't already know this, we have a neighbor of the steps, Gabriel Frederick. And you can see how far it goes. On the right, it goes into questions that the judge asked. And WB step defendant, it's asking who lived on the adjoining farm, when did his brother move into the land, and your deed boundary covers the land, and does it not? He says yes. And then, have you been in possession of that since the date of the deed, 1899? He says yes. So now when we're doing our land research, we have dates, we have names, we have neighbors, we have the acreage, we know who is claiming what. Over here on the second column that's highlighted, we have two more neighbors that are listed. So, you know, every record that we look at when we're doing genealogy research leads us to further research. Everything should give us something that we want to continue to research. So as we make our notes and we say, oh, now I want to look into these land records. Now I want to look into marriage records. I have a first name if I didn't have that already. So everything gives us clues to do additional research and maybe answer some of the questions that we already have. So I was thrilled to find this. I have some of my steps are a bit elusive and didn't want to leave much of a paper trail. And here they all are, just giving all this information during this court case. And what happens when you're in court, obviously you want to win. You've gone to court to receive something. And so this person wanted to receive the land. And so they're just making all the connections they can make. They're telling everything they can tell. Here again, we've got a little more, they go through, they list children. Again, it's talking about how many acres, we have neighbors, whoops, too far. So this was just a great find, several pages. And I just showed you the Southwestern. The Kentucky volume had actually a little bit more information in it. So you always want to check everything that you can. If it's in 2 volumes, get both of the volumes. So here's the Atlantic Reporter. We're going to look at a little different case. This lists all the states. Again, it gives us the time frame. This is October 1885 to January 1886. And this one is Bell versus Fulton. So Bell and others sued Fulton and others, and then Fulton sued Bell and others, and it went back and forth a couple of times. This is Washington County, Pennsylvania. And you can see at the bottom of the screen, again, it's highlighted, John Fulton bequeathed all his property to be retained for the use of my family, to be under the care and management of them jointly, so that as long as they continue together, the whole to be joint or common property, and the profits arising from the farm and other property to be considered as the property of the family jointly. So his goal was to keep everything within the family. We continue on, and sorry, it went off the side a little bit when I was getting it large enough to see. But he talks about, should any of his daughters, so he had a son and 4 daughters, and should any of his daughters withdraw from the family, they would get $100, bed, bedding, a bureau, and a saddle, and that was it. And then they couldn't claim anything else. So a little further down, you see he lists his children, James, his only son, and Margaret, Jean, and Mary, his daughters. And we continue on, and Mary withdrew from the family, then wanted the rest of her inheritance. But the court said no, she withdrew, and it said that was it. She knew that going in, so she just gets her $100 in bureau and bed and bedding and saddle. But it's interesting that in the court case, we now know that Mary withdrew and received her allowance. Margaret, the other daughter, died intestate. James and Anna and Jane died, leaving David Fulton, son of Jane, their shares. So we now have all of that to family and to follow. And in the family, Mary was the last of the siblings to survive. So now if we go back, we know when the court case happened, we have approximate dates. So if we're having difficulty finding this family and when they died, we now have a little more to go on. So this information is just priceless. It's just, it's like finding little biographies on these families and what was going on with them at that time. This is another one from the Northwestern Reporter. This was Minnesota. And this is a family where the housekeeper and the nurse filed a claim against the estate of a couple that she worked for. So she worked as the nurse and the housekeeper for this couple, and this gives their address. It says here, in their later years, both required nursing care. That's how she came into their house. It gives the dates of their death. And then it also goes on to say that the wife had owned real estate in question since her divorce from her first husband sometime prior to 1902. It goes on to say that the property remained in her name until December 12th, 1935, at which time it was placed in the name of herself and husband. I mean, this is just priceless, priceless information. She had a son from her first marriage who didn't like the idea the title was in their names. And so you have all the family stuff comes out because everybody wants a piece of the estate. Everybody's after what they think they are owed and what they deserve. So we also have Supreme Court cases. We have Federal Digest for federal cases. So we're going to take a look at the Supreme Court Digest, and the index works a little different for this. These are by case numbers. This is too small for you to see, but we're looking at Drake and Taylor on the left-hand column. It's highlighted lightly there. Look at it a little closer. Down at the bottom, Drake versus Taylor, and the numbers in parens, you can see the parentheses next to each one. That is the case number that we're going to look for. So here in the index, we find Drake versus Taylor. That's who we want, and it gives us 4,067. So that's the case we want to look for. So that is going to be in book 7, and you can see that book 7, we're looking for Drake. So this is Dart through Dunbar. Our Drake falls right in there. These are case numbers 3583 through 4130. So our case falls right within those parameters. And so when we look it up, here it is, case 4087, and we can read on. And this was a dispute between two individuals who had been in business together. One then went into business with somebody else. They had an import business, and they just had all kinds of squabbles. But if either one is your family, again, it just gives you wonderful, wonderful information. So, and again, you can see up at the top, case 4067, Drake et al. Versus Taylor et al., and it goes into the case. So I mentioned a little earlier that the Library of Congress, one of my favorite, absolute favorite resources, the law library at the Library of Congress contains the largest body of United States federal and state law, foreign law, international law. It has just an incredible, incredible collection. It also has some of the early reporters, laws from Massachusetts, obviously 17th century and Virginia court reports. So if you can visit there, this is one of the things you're definitely going to look for. And some of their information is on microform. When you go onto the Library of Congress website, they have some of the Supreme Court reporters digitized and available online. So if you put in Library of Congress Law Library and you click on about this collection, you can read all about the collection. It will tell you what they have, how to access it, how to find things they don't have. And when you search, it will give you the name of the reports. So you can see highlighted in blue the periodical U.S. reports. And this goes back to 1799. The one below it is 1794 to 1799. And then you click on the page to the left. You find the one that you want, click on the page, and you can start reading through. Now, the difficulty with this is that you can't search you can't say, well, I'm looking for my ancestor Jane Jones and just put Jane Jones in the search criteria. It's listed by the court case. You can search by time frame. You can search by the type of case. But if you know a time frame, you can go through the index and see what you might come up. Here's an index from 1754. And you can go through, and maybe one of your ancestors sued somebody or was sued, and you can glance through this way and see what you might find. And so, sorry, let me go back. So you find what you want, and then you just go to the page number on this one. And then here's the case right here, right on the Library of Congress website. So pretty cool. There are lots of published records that you can find about court cases. They're in state libraries, they're in state and county archives, state and county historical societies, of course. There are various published works. One of the things we want to keep in mind is that in colonial times, church and state were inseparable in most counties. And so you can find out a lot of things about individuals, those accused of witchcraft, adultery, disputes, moral behavior, just all sorts of juicy stuff. One thing that I wanted to point out that is not necessarily part of researching in a law library, but it's always important for us to know when laws change, what the statutes are, what were the laws regarding marriage, what were the laws regarding guardianship, when was a woman allowed to own land in her own name. All of these things are important to us to know for the state, the county, that we research in. And there's a website, this is not on your handout, so I'll give you just a moment to write this down, advancinggenealogist.com. She's put together a really neat index by state. You can see down below here in the blue link, you can click on the state or the territory, and you can search for different laws and the times that they changed. And so if you go through, here's the beginning of Indiana's page, and she has Indiana territorial laws as well. So that is something that's really handy for us. So I'll give you just a moment to write that down. Let me go back. It's advancinggenealogist.com. And then once you get to the main page, you can look for laws and statutes. She has a lot of other resources on there as well. The American Digest that we talked about briefly earlier, those early volumes, those are available on Google Books. So if you can't get into the law library, check out Google Books, and you can go through and check the index and then go page by page. And again, these early ones, this is the 1895, I believe. It's nice. More and more these are being digitized and available online, where it used to be you actually had to go in. But it's far more fun to go into the law library. If you go in at least once, it's really a fun research trip. So if you are going to go into the state law library, and they're redoing their website so that so it'll be easier to get to the Sutro Library or the Whitkin Library or whichever branch of the California State Library you're trying to visit, either in person or on their website. It'll be easier to access that, but they're not quite there yet. If you go on the main page and you go to Law Library, you can, if you fall into the category of this top, who may apply for a state library card, you can get some of these resources on interlibrary loan, or you can check them out. So if you're a state employee, if you're with legislative staff, you can actually check out some of these books and materials, which would be just fabulous. If you're going to visit the Whitcomb Library, up at the top right where the question mark is and it says Ask a Librarian, I would highly recommend that before you go, you click on that. There's a drop down. You can email the law librarians. You select the library that you want to visit, and then you send your question. And I would highly recommend that you submit that before you go. Ask, double check on the hours that they're open. which you want to do for any repository. You want to find out when they're open and what the current protocol is, what their current um, uh, rules and regulations are, especially since COVID, because everything has changed. And particularly at the Whitcomb, you want to make sure that they have the volumes that you're looking for. And if you want the earlier volumes, sometimes you have to order that ahead of time. So they pull it and it takes them a while. So if you just show up, you might be waiting for a long time. So you want to send your request, and then when you hear back, you might want to give them a call or send in more questions. And if you're looking for something really unique and specific, I would contact them first, make sure that they have it, make sure they can have it available on the day that you are there. This shows the location. The lower part next to the state capitol is the state law library. The county law library is the other highlighted area, a couple of streets away. Both are really good, but again, for those earlier volumes, you want to go to the state law library. That's who has that earlier volume. This shows the interior of the county law library. Just looks like a library, but you can see on the map, and you can get this on their website, so you can see where the federal supplements are, where the Southwest reporters, where the state reporters. So before you go, you know where things are located. Another thing to check before you go is how they allow you to make photocopies. Sometimes they won't let you, just like the Sutro Library, they won't let you put the earlier volumes on a copy machine sometimes. You'll want to find out what they charge for copies. Can you take your phone in and make copies? You're going to want to make sure you know all of that before you go in person. There are a lot of websites that give information or have all of this information online. However, most of them are subscription based, and either you have to have a subscription or the library has to have a subscription. Some libraries will let the general public go in and use the databases. A lot of these subscriptions are extremely expensive, so they don't let just anybody go in and use them. It depends on the library. That would be another question you would have before you go in to research. And of course, the ones on the bottom of the page, these are not subscription, but the ones on the top are subscription. Lexis, Westlaw, Hein Online, these they charge for. So if you want to use that, you'll want to check and see if they make that available to patrons that don't have a subscription. So there was a question earlier about this information being available across the pond. Most countries have their own version of a law library and the digest and reporters and archives. I have not researched in any of them, so I don't know exactly how they work, although I have a friend who has used the law libraries in Canada and says they are very, very similar. And one should never assume, but I would think and I would assume that if ours and the Canadian law libraries are similar, that England and Wales and Scotland would also be similar. I can't speak to other countries, but certainly that would be something to look into. I don't know what's available online. So if you're not there in person, it might be a little tricky, but you could probably find somebody there to do some research for you. But I would think, their cases would be similar to ours in that they certainly would recap anything that set a precedent, and anything that they reported as far as appellate cases. So you'd probably be able to find those. So I know that was a little bit of a quick overview, but hopefully this encourages you to go to the law library. Hopefully this encourages you to look online, but really go in person. Law librarians are incredibly helpful. They really do want to help people in the general public. They don't turn up their nose and say, oh gosh, you're just a researcher, go away. I have found them to be incredibly welcoming, incredibly friendly and helpful. And it's always just more fun to go to a library in person and just pull the volumes off the shelf and find great information. So hopefully you will find some information similar to what I found, and that'll fill in some of the gaps in your genealogy research. So I've left a little bit of time for questions. So if there are any questions, I would love to hear them.
Okay, I have a couple questions so far. First question, do law libraries contain immigration paperwork for immigrants, um, naturalized U.S. citizens?
So yes and no. So that would not be my first place to look for immigration information. If there was a court case about it, then yes. And some of the larger law libraries might have some immigration records, but that would be more on a court level. And the tricky thing with immigration is that different courts at different times in different geographic areas had jurisdiction. So I think you'd have more luck going right to the court rather than a law library.
Okay, let's see. You might want to turn screen sharing off. Now
Okay,
it
I
looks a little
will. You.
looks kind of interesting. Okay, there we go.
Oh,
Let's see. Here's the next question. Do divorces or adoptions show up in these libraries?
yes, they do.
Ah,
So, but again, you would have to find the case. So it isn't like you would go into a courthouse and say, I want to look at a list of um, I want to look at a list of divorces. Um, but if the divorce was contentious, went back and forth, or if that was the way that jurisdiction decided that title of property was going to be handled, then yes. So sometimes you had to go to court and actually have a court case to decide who owned the property or how it was going to be dispersed. And there was really no disagreement over it. That was just the way that jurisdiction decided to handle it. So in that case, yes, but it would still be in one of the case books, reporters, or digest. If that makes sense.
and what about adoptions?
So adoptions are a little tricky. Again, if it's a court case, excuse me, you will find it in the case book. With those, they tried to keep that private. Again, I think you'd have better luck going to a courthouse and looking under those specific names and time frame.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. Do eastern southern counties have similar digests that survived the burned courthouses?
Oh, yes, yes. And that is one of the wonderful things um, because the volumes of the cases, the reporters and the digest, there are thousands of volumes. So if the local law library burned, those will be in another county, another state. Those will be easy to find. Absolutely.
Okay. If people want to, I'm going to allow people to unmute themselves also if someone should want to actually ask a question with their voice. But we do have another question here ready to go. So I'm going to ask that one. The law books you mentioned only deal with contested cases. Is that correct? So if there was a death with minor children and there was a guardian that would not be in these records, but in local records for the city, county where the death occurred. Hmm.
That is correct. So these digest reporters and so forth, they do not cover every single case in the country. They cover cases where it was appealed and the judge or the court thought that it would be of value to future cases that were similar, or if a point of law changed. And so, they're published so that lawyers can, for those in my generation that watched Perry Mason years ago, and Perry Mason and the later shows say, I point to case whatever to make my point. That's why these are published. And we're just lucky that within these published cases, we sometimes can find our ancestors. So it isn't every single court case.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do we have more questions? Who else has a question? This is our opportunity. You can either ask it in chat or with audio. We must have some more questions. This is a very meaty subject.
No more questions? Well, I hope both the California State Law Library and the County Law Library are just inundated with, I shouldn't do this to them, but I hope they are just inundated with emails and phone calls and people wanting to visit, because it is so much fun to browse through and go back to a volume of court cases from the 1700s, the 1800s, and open up the index and think, oh, I wonder if this family is my family, and then go in and find that my one of my husband's relatives um, slipped on the dock, got off a ship, slipped on the dock, and sued the captain and the owner of the ship, and won. And then they appealed, and it went back and forth. And there was all kinds of wonderful information about who was left in Scotland, who still had to come over, and back and forth. So you just never know what you're. It's like the rest of our research. You never know what you're going to find, and it's just fascinating. That's what keeps us addicted to this. So hopefully, even if there are no questions, hopefully you're all next week. You're all at a law library somewhere.
Well, looks like we have some more questions. I knew there'd be some more. Uh, do you recommend going to the newspapers to find out about disputes that might have involved your family and then go to the law library, or you recommend checking the law library first?
Oh, good question. That's an excellent question. Well, my philosophy on newspaper research is to read the entire newspaper, obviously, not just look for the death notices and so forth. I think a lot of these cases probably would not be in the newspaper unless it's a small weekly newspaper, and it went into the kind of the column of what's happening. I probably would go to the law library, and if I found something really interesting, I would check the newspaper. I look at the law library, though, as not one of our first stops in our genealogy research. I see it as coming, well after our census and our tax and our land research and our newspaper research and our city directory research. After we've done all of that, then I see this as kind of that fun, oh, let me see what else I can find. But if you've got a free afternoon and you can get to the law library, whether you've done this other research or not, I would say go.
I've noticed that in the Sacramento Bee and the Sacramento Union as well, are two big local
Mhm.
newspapers here, particularly in the 19th century. There were a lot of legal cases that were mentioned in those newspapers, particularly regarding land and inheritance. That's where there's a lot of stuff, and they're online. And well, the entire Bee is online and easily searchable. And the Union is online with a California digital newspaper collection. You just do a search on that, and you can find that. Sacramento Union is online through 1923. So you can definitely, there's a lot of legal cases mentioned there.
Absolutely. And that does bring up that, when you're doing your newspaper research, always look at the newspaper in the county seat, even if your ancestors didn't live in the county
Mm.
seat. If they were way off on the side, almost in the next county or whatever, always check the paper of the county seat, because that's where the legal notices will be. That's where the you'll see who's suing who, and so yeah, good point, Dave. That's very important to our research.
Well, here we have another good, interesting question. Do you find early slave owner cases in the digests?
Excellent question. I have not found very many, no. Um, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't look. I think that it's an excellent resource to look and see. There are some, but I've not found many.
Are there what resources are there, or so if someone is say an African American wants to do some research into this area, are there any particular avenues that you would recommend to them within law libraries?
So I think the best source, and that is not, unfortunately, that's not really a specialty of mine. I would say check with the law librarian. These are mostly in the law library. You're going to find statutes, so you're going to be able to look when laws changed, and you're going to be able to read court cases. And so the difficulty in looking for the court cases is that you need the names of who sued. It's probably a slave owner maybe suing another slave owner, or if a slave escaped and they were offering a reward, it's the slave's name, in order to appear in the index, would have to either sue somebody or be sued, and that was quite rare, unfortunately. So I think that would be, there just wouldn't be as many opportunities to find that. But the law librarians probably would have some ideas that I would not. I would check with the law librarian and say, okay, well, here's my goal. This is what I'm looking for. What other avenues would I have to use your resources?
Great, great, thank you. Let's see. More questions. Do we have any more questions? Anyone want to um, ask a question with audio? Uh, no more questions. I'm quite surprised. Usually we get more questions than this.
Excuse me.
Ah,
As
great.
settlers moved west and north, and so are those cases before they were states included in these digests?
Oh, excellent question. Excellent question. Yes, if there was a courthouse and a judge in a territory, it would. Now, some of the very early ones would not be, because they probably were not setting precedent yet. But yes, there are cases published from territories. Excellent question.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have some more questions? Please don't be shy. This is our opportunity.
Everybody's making notes on what they're going to look for in the law library.
Well, while everyone's thinking, I am going to go ahead and do a shameless plug for next month's genealogy program. Next month's genealogy program takes place on September 23rd, again, a Saturday as usual, same time, 1 to 2:30. It's called Think Like an Archivist, Finding Genealogy Records in Libraries and Archives with Nancy Lowe. Nancy Lowe will be the speaker. So you'll learn about using archival records and repositories, finding aids for genealogists, finding genealogy records in archives, and requesting archival materials. So that really should go hand in hand with the material today.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi. Um, I'm wondering if, pardon me, if there's a law library in Kansas. There was a tragic event in our family that went to trial there. And it would be wonderful to be able to see the results of that trial.
Yes. So you may not necessarily have to go to Kansas. So the value of a larger law library is that they have a lot of these volumes. And
Oh.
so the state law library, for instance, in California, doesn't just have California volumes. They have the state digest for other states. They have the regional reporters, and so you would need the time frame of that case, and then just go to the Kansas, the volume that covers Kansas, or find the Kansas state reporter for that time frame and look it up. I bet you find it.
Great. Oh, thank you. That's very helpful. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Great question. Good luck with that.
Yes, thank you.
And here we have another question. Is there a place to look up California land grants?
Oh, California land grants. Well, that would not be at the law library, but you could probably find that at the archives.
Okay, the California State
California State
Archives.
Archives. I would check with them um, and see what they recommend.
I am going to post our handout again for those who haven't downloaded it yet. So here we go. There's the handout, and this video is being recorded, and it will be posted and left up indefinitely. Thank you very much, Pamela. And
Absolutely. I will, while we're waiting on more questions, I will point out that on, speaking of the handout, the last page, the bibliography and the references, there's a handful of books listed. One is Black's Law Dictionary. Um, I like the fourth edition, but I would just get an early edition. As you're doing your research, whether you're looking at cases in the law library or any research, it's handy to have either the actual dictionary or it's available on Google Books. But a lot of times, the terms that we think we understand because we look at them through the eyes of somebody living in 2023, those terms and words don't mean the same as they did in 1754. So I think it's very valuable to have a copy of that at your fingertips, whether it's online or you have the actual book sitting on your desk.
hey, thank you. Let's see. I would once again I would like to ask uh I would like to ask everyone today. I'm currently in the middle of planning our schedule for 2024. So if you have any suggestions for topics or speakers, please send me an email at contact@saclibrary.org. I would love to hear from you, and that email address is sitting there in the chat right now. Any more questions? Any final questions for our guest? Okay, well, thank you, Pamela. It's been very interesting. I
Thank
appreciate you
you.
joining us.
Well, I look forward to running into all of you in the law
All
library.
right.
And thank
Excuse
you
me.
again, Dave, for all that you and the library do.
Oh,
We
I
appreciate it.
appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay, everyone. We will see you next month.